Hello and welcome to the You Know How to Live show. My name is Kate Hammer, and in just a moment, we will have Rhonda Mcgee with us. Rhonda is a professor of law at the University of San Francisco, trained in sociology and mindfulness-based stress reduction, also known as MBSR. She is a highly trained facilitator of trauma-sensitive, restorative MBSR interventions for lawyers and law students, and for minimizing the effects of social identity-based bias. Today, we will be digging into her book, The Inner Work of Racial Justice, and talking about how you can develop your own ongoing practice of awareness and action against injustice. Now, wherever you are listening or watching from, I'm so glad that you tuned in and are hanging out. I hope that you are ready for my favorite combination of things, hopefully a bit of entertainment and, of course, some takeaways to improve how you work and play and do all the things you do in between. Please take a moment right now to subscribe, follow, leave a comment, or give a 5-star review so that we can stay connected. And with that, let's bring in Rhonda Mcgee. Hi, Rhonda. Thank you so much for making time to be here and to chat with me today about your book.
Hello, Kate. It's beautiful to be with you. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so before we talk about your book, The Inner Work of Racial Justice, would you tell us a little bit about the work you do as an educator and how you became interested in mindfulness within the context of teaching?
Well, so thank you so much. I'm a lawyer by training. Also studied sociology at the graduate level. I was trying to decide at a certain point in university, whether I wanted to get a PhD and maybe teach sociology. I was really interested in how people resolve conflicts. And so, in conversations with my graduate studies advisor, we got this idea, maybe you should go to law school. So I ended up going to law school, but the view always to be able to teach and to help people think well about how we resolve conflict. So practiced law for a bit and then started teaching. I've been teaching for more than 20 years at the University of San Francisco and visiting at a couple other places. But, it became very clear to me that when we really are learning and in a way that's transformative, it's not just a cognitive or intellectual practice or engagement. It's a kind of a whole body thing. Like, we are like, we feel things. We're in relationship with each other when we're really learning and we're really feeling in kind of a flow around learning. And so I started to gravitate towards ways of teaching that would enhance that sense of being completely engaged in the process of learning the knowledge, skills, and values associated with being a lawyer. And that led me to this sort of contemplative or mindful education approach. And so I'm part of this network of people who teach at the university and K through 12 level and at various levels now, post official education into professional and other developmental engagements, but from this place of centering on the holistic subjective piece, like who we are and where we come from and what we already know and how that relates to the objective, scholarly, research-based sources of knowledge. And then how we interpersonally, that kind of that second person, you and I together, how we learn better together. So I bring this sort of contemplative way of teaching and learning to teaching about law, but also teaching about multicultural education, multicultural reality, diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice, social activism. So that's really what my passion has been.
Yeah, absolutely. You take us back in your story as an educator to a time in the book, to a time when this was not part of how you taught. It may have been part of your personal life and your personal pursuit. And you spoke about this very wise advice that you received in therapy. Can you talk a little bit about what that was?
Yeah, thanks for naming that part of my story. Because it is such an important point. It was an important point for me, but I also, hope it resonates in some respects or invites people into a similar kind of inquiry. Yeah, I was in this place where I was really not sure whether after all these years of training, study, focus, dedication, having gotten tenure as a law professor, I really felt that the way I had been taught in law school, a wonderful law school, the University of Virginia, it's a
Yeah.
very good law school, but
Yeah.
the way I had been taught just didn't really feel, it felt like I was leaving something behind when I would enter into the classroom. It felt like I wasn't, if I were sort of teaching the way I had been taught,
Yeah.
sort of following the model of the actually mostly white male law professors that I had been privileged and fortunate to learn with. If I
Mhm.
followed that model, which was kind of what we learned to do in law, you sort of just teach the way you were taught.
Mhm.
Um, I felt like I was missing something, and maybe I was on the wrong path because I felt like this interior, interpersonal, more holistic approach to
Mhm.
learning, which invites our stories in, which invites our emotional reactivity in, which invites our challenges at building trustworthy relationships, which can be essential if we're going to learn together and collaboratively, right? So there was a lot that I felt that I wasn't bringing in. So I was thinking maybe I should leave law, and I went to a therapist and I got this really important advice from me that you could always leave this great job that you have worked really hard to get in a beautiful city that you love living in, and so on and so forth. Like, you could just leave and start over. But
Mhm.
for doing that, why don't you explore fully dropping anchor where you are? Like, really seeing if you're bringing all of who you are, if you're taking the risk, pushing the envelope to
Mhm.
bring more of who you are right here. And
Yeah.
if you do that for a little bit, and then you really find, hey, I've done that. And I push the envelope as far as I can.
Mhm.
Then you can sort of discern, okay, I've done all that, and I really do need to start over or take a different path or leave. And here's why. And that was really, really helpful advice for me. It kind of helped put me on the path to doing this work, to bringing my own voice, my own approach in.
Mhm.
And it led to all of these beautiful outcomes that, the book and other things have flowed from that.
Yeah, I so appreciated that you chose to share that wisdom because it actually can be applied so broadly.
Yes.
Sometimes when we evaluate our work, our jobs, our careers, we're thinking about what they look like on paper, not necessarily what we as individuals can bring to them and how we can like bring them alive and awake in that way. So
Exactly.
I love that. Yeah, I was so moved by that. I love
We
that.
have power. I mean, we obviously
Yeah.
have power, and yet we often don't realize that we have it in ways that can be applied everywhere, including to, hmm, how do I meet this particular job, role, responsibility in a way that's kind of uniquely mine?
Hmm.
And that, is what really I think is the basic teaching of that experience for me, that we can do that anytime.
Mhm. Ah, I love that.
Mhm.
Okay. Why did you decide to write The Inner Work of Racial Justice? And who is it written for?
Well, I think it's a little bit of a follow up to what I was just speaking about, in that I had been, but just to say a little bit more, I've been
Yeah.
teaching law, but really teaching a range of types of courses. So, personal injury law and immigration, and just all the kind of typical things, some
Mhm.
typical courses.
Yeah.
But also a course I've been creating about race in American legal history, race in contemporary law and policy, and really inviting a kind of a deeper dive into what really are the aspirations that people bring to this work of racial justice, and
Mhm.
where is the law kind of part of the problem, and how has it been part of the solution, and why does it have this sort of two-faced, right, way of presenting itself somehow. So, but that's some that's some serious inquiry, right? That this is not
Yeah.
just, here are the four elements of a negligence tort, like, here's how you prove somebody failed to use due care, the kind of work I do in my personal injury class. uh this is inviting, really reflecting, what does equality mean?
Mm,
What is it that anti-discrimination law is meant to repair, or
mm,
what is it meant to if it's against discrimination, what is it for? What are we really, trying to achieve?
Yeah.
And again, in recognition of the fact that we're doing this in a real live context where people have experience with this thing called race and law, them themselves, their family, their parents, their loved ones.
Mhm.
We know something about this. So yeah, I really felt in my efforts to bring this subject matter alive and support all my students, my colleagues, and others as we engage in these issues into
Yeah.
this sort of holistic type of engagement that I was mentioning before.
Yeah.
I really felt that mindfulness and compassion practices were helping. So I started bringing that into the classroom, and in that sense, the content for the book just started to evolve,
Mhm.
and I began presenting about what I was doing in the classroom, and people started saying, it sounds like you either have a book or something you're working on, so in other words, publishers
Mhm.
actually were contacting me before I had a book ready, actually. And so that's always also a
Awesome.
good
Yeah.
sign that whatever it is that you're doing is resonating with people and could offer some benefit beyond where you are. So, yeah, I mean, I wrote the book partly because it was flowing out of my work. I wanted to write. I am, as a
Mhm.
scholar and teacher, we write. So I
Mhm.
was in the process around it, but then also getting this positive feedback. And in terms of the audience, I really wrote the book for everybody because I actually think that, well, in my humble experience on the planet, these
Yeah.
decades, and in these conversations I've had with thousands of people around race, it's so clear that, we all have relevant information and experience that
Yeah.
can assist us in really understanding more about, how how race is a feature in our lives today, what racism, in all its various guises, it looks
Mhm.
different here, it looks different there, what it
Yeah.
looks like in different contexts, the impacts it has had. And because I think some of us are more used to talking about race as a feature in our lives
Mhm.
than others, it's a good question. It's not obvious that actually I'm on the one hand inviting people who haven't had very much support and experience looking at race and racism, their own experience, and talking about it with others.
Mhm.
Definitely the book is written to invite those folks to the table, but
Mhm.
it's also written for folks who have daily experience engaging in a world which is reminding us, and this is often people of color, right?
Mhm.
In a world and context where, um, if you're a member of the majority of whatever group, and you're in a
Mhm.
place where your kind of identity and background, let's say you're in a majority white space, community,
Mhm.
institution, environment, your background can sometimes feel a little bit invisible. It's almost like the water you're swimming in. There's nothing pointing out daily
Mhm.
that makes you feel like it's about race or race is relevant.
Yeah.
But by contrast, when people who are minoritized or in a minority situation in that context
Mm.
are there, they are able to sort of see, oh no, we're swimming in a particular kind of water, and my experience is a little different. And so the invitation is for those folks as well to kind of um, explore the way that awareness and compassion practices
Mhm.
can help us. And I'll speak as one who daily and regularly experiences being reminded that race is a feature of my life,
Mm.
how these practices can help us, first of all, heal from some of the wounds that come from being, targeted for discrimination or negative stereotypes or
Mhm.
microaggressions, whatever that is. Um, and also, again, sense our power, feel our power to disrupt some of the ways that those wounds can lead to further negative consequences in our lives.
Mhm.
Mindfulness, very famously supports us in sort of recognizing there's that first wound that any one of us might experience. There's a teaching called the two arrows. The first arrow is like whatever happens. It could be a physical wound, an injury. In other words, soft-bellied human beings, we're vulnerable in the world. Things happen to
Mhm.
us.
Mhm.
That first arrow can happen to any one of us. It could be physical injury, it could be psychological damage or trauma.
Mhm.
How we respond to that, including how we might ruminate, seize it, tell us
Mhm.
constant story, twist the arrow in a little bit more. That's in the Buddhist teachings, if I may,
Yeah.
been the base for a lot of the mindfulness work. That second arrow is one we can control. How
Mm.
deep are we? How are we about really noticing what we're contributing to the harm? And so the work also invites, that's just one example. That's just one example of how
Mm.
the work can invite people who are feeling the wounds of racism and discrimination and all the other isms and schism, by the way, that intersect with race, right? It's gender, immigration status, and on and on and on, right? It's not just this one dimension. There are always, multiple intersecting vectors of social harm that we're talking about. When we
Mm.
talk about race in particular, because it's often very hard to look at that part,
Mm.
we can very easily skip off into class or gender or anything else if we're not really holding ourselves into this space. But yeah, so the book was really written for all of us, who, because each of us in our own unique ways have experienced, have suffered, though not equally, but in some way,
Mm.
around this thing called racism, which is really, in my view, about the the way that human efforts to categorize in group and out group and us and them and these sorts of folks and that sorts of, which is a very common, back to the sociologist in me, that's a very
Mhm.
common thing that humans do. But once we do that, we then often rank order, right? We're not content really with mere differentiation and diversity,
Mm.
because then we have to embed in the differences meaning and preferences, you know. And from there, the minute there's any kind of resource accumulation, how we distribute resources varies. So some people have had better access to rights to immigrate than others.
Mm.
Some people have better access to education, healthcare, respect, the power to decide even how to distribute the resources that we have. All of
Mm.
these things vary, and so I think of racism as an invitation for us to look at how these prejudices that flow from the differentiations that we make as human beings intersect with power differences
Mm.
to
Mhm.
lead to maldistributions of the resources necessary to thrive. And so we all, like, in some way, might be in a place of power, in a place of disadvantage around this or that, um, and have more or less influence
Mm.
around these things. So it's an invitation, I think, to really look at power, its use and abuses, and how power is distributed in ways that tell us something about the ongoing impact of these racial groups, including in our own psyche. Like, how are we thinking about who should be in power, who should have access, who should have education and
Mm.
healthcare? And what are the subtle inputs
Mm.
that tell us that some people are more deserving than others? And again, race is just one of those inputs,
Mm.
but it's one that we might want to look at if we are concerned about a more just and equal world.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. As I was reading your book, I did get that sense of how inclusive it was meant to be. Um, there are moments of challenge, there are so many stories, but it felt like a series of invitations and requests for you to do something, to whether it's reflect, but and what action you might do after the reflection. But um what I found is I never felt like I was left hanging or wondering what to do next. There's a lot of guidance throughout the book, which I loved.
Yeah. Thank you for naming that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you speak to the necessity of healing within the community context.
Hmm.
Can you describe what that means and how someone might set out to do that, to heal within community context?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that question. I mean, it invites really first pausing and thinking, like, what do we even mean by community and who's in that? Right. Already is like,
Yeah.
what community? Is there a community? Like, I mean, because I think in our, in these times, I think there's a lot of ambivalence almost around the idea of community. I mean, it's often people feel a little bit on the outs, you know, right? It's like,
Yeah.
am I in a community? What is my community? Where is my community? And when we talk about these issues of race, there's often like a presumption that there is, for example, a Black community.
Mm.
And we must be talking about that. And there must be, where are they? And where is the member? Who's in charge of this community? And you start to really realize that. So that's a question, like, how am I defining community?
Mm.
And by the way, a lot of my teaching and this contemplative approach, this mindful approach to teaching and learning, sometimes we use contemplative learning as a way of thinking about it. It's very inquiry based, right? It's much less about here's how you should think about it, and much more about what do you already know about this? Where are your questions?
Mm-hmm.
And where are your mixed messages and confusion? And the same is true for the community piece. But but there is something to this idea that first of all, we live in communities, right? We live in groups, and often in some way, obvious and not obvious, we're sort of feeling our way into networks of connection and concern. And we might, if we stop and think about it, feel like it's kind of a community. It might be the place where we grew up or the place where we live now, where we work. It might be defined by our social identities, or it may not be. So we have different ways of thinking about it. But what I definitely, in the subtitle, Transforming Our Communities,
Mm-hmm.
again, as you're pointing out in my book, I'm really inviting people to think about, well, what is the community you'd like to be in?
Yeah.
Is it where you live right now? Is it your workplace? Is it the network of people that you work with, which may be, at this point, global or transnational? Or is it these historical, racialized communities that we think of sometimes when we think about the impact of racism, right? So the Black community, the white community, whether we're talking in a particular area or maybe even more broadly. So what do we mean? But however we mean that, I think it's first important to think about what we mean and what we both experience in these communities
Yeah.
that may be tied to these legacies of racism, or maybe playing out some of the dynamics,
Mm-hmm.
often unintentionally, right? We may have just inherited some ways of being that, if we look around, are kind of constituting a certain kind of community.
Mm-hmm.
And it may not have been exactly what we chose, but it is what it is. And so bringing awareness to who we are
Mm-hmm.
in this community and who we aren't, and then inquiring about that is, again, part of this effort, inquiring about how we might bring more intentionality
Mm.
to how we constitute communities. And that can look very many things, but some inquiry into, how did this community get to be formed this way with these demographics, for example? Often,
Yeah.
again, even if we haven't been thinking about it ourselves, if we stop and think about it, we might start to understand that there's some dynamics driving communities to be formed and constituted, populated by, right, demographically constituted in this way versus this way. And if we look more closely at those drivers and think about our intentions, our values, what we really want,
Mm-hmm.
we might be able to discern together. By the way, I think a lot about this idea of working with others and having power with others as opposed to power over.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to transform how we use our power, right? Can we
Mm-hmm.
use our power together as opposed to over people? that's what we mean. In some ways, I mean by racial
Yeah.
justice.
Mhm.
But so when we start thinking about like, well, how would we together form this community?
Mhm.
And what would it take to get us there? And what does that take inside of me, like to become the kind of person who can work with others to become, to help form that community? What would it take for us? Like, what do we need to be able to see together, do together, say to each other? What kind of conflict
Yeah.
resolution processes do we have, right? Because it's not always going to be, puppies and rainbows. How do we resolve
Yeah.
the inevitable conflicts? And and then what do we do in terms of the policies or practices that keep us going together along this path, this values identified or values aligned path? So I
Mm.
think having a sense of like who the community is, what our
Mhm.
values are, and then embedding this sort of willingness and the tools to support this kind of ongoing inquiry, which I smile when I talk about, because to me, this is the joyful part. It's like, who are we really and what are we trying to do? And let's get after that with some
Yeah.
consciousness, right? And see what
Yeah.
can come alive as we do that together.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love, though, how the book is really a journey. You know, it starts with you just simply reflecting and these stories, reading through these stories and reflecting on your reactions and what surfaces throughout. But it moves you toward what you can do next and what that can look like within the context of others. But when I think about someone who would pick this book up, okay, it's somebody who's interested in learning about racial justice,
Mhm,
someone who's interested in learning about healing and
mhm,
mindfulness, and someone who probably recognizes that there is a practice that is ongoing
mm.
potentially. It's not just, "Hey, I'm gonna go learn a thing and then check the box." Like, no, and yeah, and I think you explain very well why it needs to be that way, and then how you can really do that successfully over a long period of time, over a lifetime, hopefully. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for putting it that succinct. That's exactly what I was trying to do with the book. I mean, really, have people
Yeah.
see it as like an ongoing arc of life.
Yeah.
Right? Because as you so beautifully put it, this isn't about we go to a training, we do an
Yeah.
event, right? It's really seeing that of course we're in this soup, if you will, of like
Mhm.
all of the legacies of race and racism that are
Yeah.
just always around. And it'd be one thing if we could somehow magically erase it all and never have any new inputs. But my goodness, all you have to do is pick up this guy or turn on the news, right? And there's more information and input, right? Some more that we could have a reaction to,
Yep.
slide it into our pre-existing teachings and trainings about who matters, who doesn't, and like come out, right, of
Mhm.
later emails that we get today with a new commitment to some sort of subtle stereotype, or you know what I mean? So because
Mhm.
it's ongoing in our social lives, right? This thing, race is a like a more of a dynamic, it is a construction in my view. It is something that we
Yeah.
do as opposed to something that exists in the world like.
Mm.
And because of that dynamic interchange through which we kind of make real the ideas we hold about race, the book is kind of an invitation to be present to noticing that,
Yeah.
recognizing that if we've constructed race and racism, we might be able to deconstruct it in these ways that we are together. But to do that is going to require lifelong, yeah, engagement and courage and care and waking up to where we get stuck.
Yeah. Yeah, so I would say for someone who is interested in learning more, but then wants to know what to do with what they're learning, this is the perfect book for you. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll say I've had activists read it and say, this reminds me of what, we some of us have learned that when we look at civil rights movements and
Mhm.
movements for social change in our history, which of course some version of these have gone on through history all across the globe and over time.
Yeah.
So we say the civil rights movement is like this one thing, but it's like of a piece with this broad effort across the globe, looks different places, where pockets of human beings get together and say, we want to try to make this world a little bit more fair and just and equal, and let's see what we can do together. Well, in the civil rights movement in particular, there were trainings given to activists. There was like a school called the Highlander School, if listeners are interested, where before, Rosa Parks and others went on the front lines to sit and to disrupt, they were trained in how to incorporate nonviolence tactics, how to be in that crucible of all of the what would come from challenging these powerful structures that were committed to hierarchy. It's not easy. And so the training that was offered wasn't meant to help prepare the inner lives and the inner experience for being in those conflicts and coming out with something, that could sustain and survive and thrive, perhaps ideally. And I've had at least, one of my readers I'm thinking of right now who said, your book is like that type of training in a book for people.
Yeah. Yes. I agree.
Yeah.
It is training straight up.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yes. Okay. So moving away from the book a little bit and more about uh, how you make all of this work. We know that you're a tenured professor and you're teaching, and then you decided to pursue this writing as well. I think what people listening are really interested in learning more about, when someone who's able to, is able to juggle so much and find so much success within that, what does that look like on the ground? Like, how do you kick off your day? What is your morning routine? How are you jumping into all of this and making it happen? But very specifically,
Yeah.
what is your morning routine on an ideal day?
Yeah. So, okay, on an ideal and typical, not atypical day, I would say, um, you know, um, I get up and I really try and create some space for starting the day with intention.
Mm,
Sometimes that looks like setting the alarm clock earlier than I need to for whatever I have to do outside in the world or any engagement that I have, to really give myself a buffer of grounding in my own practices. And so, whether I've set the alarm clock intentionally or I know I've just, my inner alarm wakes up, the goal for me always is to have a good buffer that's
mm,
spaciously holding a period of time for me to ground in my intentions and in my, practices for reconnecting to
mhm,
source and to values and to, these inner resources. So that can what it, so that how I use that buffer time,
yeah,
varies, right? Because like a lot of folks, if I'm doing the same exact thing every day, it can get a little bit monotonous.
mhm,
But I do practices for becoming aware and awake in my body that include, yes, sitting meditation
mhm,
is the kind of a core practice for me, a regular go-to practice for me that I will infuse throughout the day, including at the beginning.
mhm,
Um, Body scan meditations, which I sometimes will engage in before I even get out of bed. Just like I'm waking up early, I'm awake
mhm.
and clearly awake because this is the temptation with the body scan. It can lull one back to sleep.
Yeah.
But if but
I feel cozy,
right,
and
right.
now I will go back to bed.
Totally there, right? But if you're, calling forth this practice as a support for, as one of my teachers, John Kabat-Zinn, says, this idea of like body scan as you rise, as a support for starting the day to kind of really wake up before you wake up and then you really wake up to like the life in your body with a body scan, lying down or seated. Um, I absolutely, uh, have as a daily commitment some movement practice.
Mhm,
And often it is some simple yoga
mhm,
asanas, or qigong, and I'm looking already toward the window because I often practice right in front of a window, because I think it's a way for me of remembering the connection between this body and this spirit and whatever I've become awake to within myself,
Mhm.
and this so-called environment, this air that we're breathing right now, this ground that is holding us right now, that basically we are a part of. We tend to think of we're somehow separate from this environment. So I like to have, especially in the morning, but not only then, but
Mhm.
certainly as a part of how I wake up in my buffer in the morning, looking out on the day. Today we're privileged, fortunate here. I'm in San Francisco. We've had a big rain event. We've had the atmospheric river and the bomb cyclone and all this interesting weather language with,
Oh, goodness.
yeah, with intense rain
Yeah.
and wind. And right now it's calm. Right now it's probably going to come back, but
Yeah.
checking out, right? What's that, dear?
I just said, "Yeah, it's gonna come back."
Exactly, it's gonna come back, right? But, like, being present to, like, what is this day, and
Yeah.
how is this impacting me? And remembering, I think the purpose for all of this is not just to become, present to the breath and feel it, which is a
Mhm.
big part of it, but also to
Mm,
remember
mm,
the preciousness of life, that we have this moment for sure. We
mm,
know from the coronavirus and every other thing, we tend to forget it as often as we can because that's what humans do. But we know our lives are precious and shockingly short,
mm,
actually. So the question is, how do we want to live? We don't know exactly how long we have. So part of what I'm doing in that buffer time is really remembering that my life matters, and therefore the things I do matter.
mm.
And I'm not trying to be perfect, because no one can be. That's a setup for failure.
Right.
But it's remembering as often as possible that what I do with the time that I have, including this moment and this day, matters. And so, yeah, part of my regular practice is starting the day with time to meditate, to focus, to feel my life, to feel the connection, and to feel the preciousness and the invitation to take some action that matters right here, right now. And then I also like to have time later in the day. So if I need it, like stress is built up during the day, I go for a walk, a mindful walk. I do movement again. I shake it off. I do all kinds of practices to kind of, because again, stress can pop up anytime. So I
Yeah.
embed these practices to like let it go, and then often close the night with a meditative sit, even if it's just a few moments on
Mm.
the edge of the bed or on my cushion. I have a cushion in an area right where I take a nightly shower if I want to do that. So just different ways that I've set my life up to support this kind of regular check-in, and
Yeah.
remembering the most
Yeah.
important thing, which is that we have this moment. Let's make the most of it.
Yeah. I like what you just said, that you'll take a walk midday if you need it. So, even the idea of considering at some point in your day, "What do I need?"
Yeah. Yes.
Whoa. I
Exactly.
mean,
Every day.
what? That right? That just on its own is kind of an incredible thing
Yes.
for me to consider because, we're, up to our eyeballs in our to-do list. Where's the how are we gonna check the box on the remembering to ask ourselves what we need? So I love that. Do you find that there are certain tells for you where "Oh, yeah, I need a walk today?"
Yes. And actually walking is a pretty regular practice too. So and it
Mhm.
helps. It actually, because I do that regularly, it kind of keeps me regulated. But yeah, if there are times when, first of all, when I might go to meditate and I'm really feeling distracted and feeling out of my body. For me, it's like, no, I'm not going to be at war with reality. Maybe I need to move, to shake up the energy a bit, whether it's some, movement practice or a good vigorous walk to support me in grounding. I'm often uh, I often remind myself that, sometimes tension is being held in the body in a way that actually just needs to move. And from that place, I can center and calm and have like more of the sense of restoration that can come from a seated meditation.
Mhm.
So, really, but the key is to sort of have this informal mindfulness
Mhm.
running in the background throughout the day. Like an informal mindfulness is just sort of lovingly, one of my teachers and friends uses this idea, thinks of mindfulness as a good friend, you know,
Oh,
it's always
yeah.
there. Yeah. To like go, how you doing? Like,
Yeah.
while we're trying,
I love that.
right?
Yeah.
While we're trying to do the thousand things, we're doing
Yeah.
all these things, we're accomplishing stuff. Mindfulness is there to be like, do you need where is your water right now? You know,
Mm. Mhm.
have you paused? You know, have you gone outside while the sun was shining during a period of rain? you know, what do you need on a regular basis? And giving permission to reclaim,
Mhm.
right? That as a sort of a very important support for thriving. Again, I in my book, as you know, I use the phrase personal justice in a way
Mhm.
for to kind of touch or turn us toward this part of how this relates to the justice work that we do. It's like
Mhm.
if I'm not taking better care of my own self, like how in the world can I really expect somebody out there to do it? How do I even know what being cared for looks like? How do I know what justice might look and feel like if I don't know how to look for, the sort of disconnects and unlovingness that I'm carrying in my own body
Mm.
toward myself? So yeah, I think the idea of mindfulness as this good friend that's always there to kind of like gently say, "Oh, you know what you're feeling, there is some tightness in your shoulder
Mm.
because you're still, you had that difficult conversation and now it's sitting in your shoulder,
Mm.
right? Why don't you just pause for a little bit, process that? Do you need to pick up the phone and call this person?" Right? Mindfulness is that underlying body based, like it's the mind in relationship to the body. Like, how am I doing? Am I running on empty because I've been staying up too late, hanging out with friends, whatever it is, trying to
Yeah.
make other people feel like I'm with them, like so they have a party, I want to be there. It's like, but is that serving you now? And can you give yourself permission to pull back? That constant remembering, again, most important thing, this is our one life. How do we want to live it? And what do we need to bring in the way of commitment to ourselves to enable us to really live our best lives?
Wow. That was so beautifully said. I can't wait to listen back to this. Seriously. I mean, yeah, I just feel this sense of you giving permission for this, and we need that from each other, right?
Yeah, yes, for sure. Because I
Yes.
can see you're working really hard, right? I mean, this didn't just happen that you have this podcast. And so having these intentionalities means, we too need support and permission to just pause.
Yeah. Yeah, when I think about like, of course I can believe, if you or somebody else takes good care of themselves, that will help them in their performance and how they feel and that they'll be living their best life. But when it's my turn to take care of myself, there's that resistance there of like, "But I had these other things." And
Yes.
so
Oh, yeah, and for
mm,
me, I had that as a big part of my this I've had a long and like, repairing, talk about reparations.
mm,
I've had this long, like, personal reparations project, repairing from, like, messages I got as a little girl about even this very simple thing of, can I be unwell? Like, is there like, if I'm not feeling well, I
Mm.
somehow got the message that my job was to push through always.
Mhm.
And, there are times, let's admit it, there are times when you kind of have to push through, if you got to take care of somebody else, you got a baby in the house or whatever's got, you got a commitment, you have to, there are times.
Yeah, yeah.
But if your everyday, all the time response to your own needs is you don't get, and then these very negative tapes of, you know, meanness to ourselves. Maybe I'm the only one that ever did this, but I had these kind of tapes, things that I would say to
Yeah.
myself that I would never say to another human, like a person I loved who was sort of feeling a little bad or down. I would never say things, but I would lift them up. I would say, you need a break. And so I've learned to do that for myself.
Yeah.
You know?
So if
Yes.
you're like me and you're listening and you're like, "Okay, I keep hearing about mindfulness, but I don't really have any kind of practice," you know, it's never too late to start. I'm very invested and attracted to what I'm learning from you, Rhonda, um, and I really see the value there. So,
Yeah. And it doesn't have to take hours out of one's day. A buffer that like I talked about, can
yeah,
be a few minutes. It's just really claiming your attention and time for yourself and being clear about that,
yeah.
and really locking in a commitment to ourselves. And it does not have to take more time. It's about how we are with the time that we
Mm, yes. So well said. Okay.
have.
From here, we are going to move on to those 2 quick segments that I mentioned to you
Yes.
before. The first one is this or that. So I will list 2 items, and in order to just get to know you a little bit better, we'll hear which you would pick.
Okay,
All
great.
right, here we go. Would you rather read a book or listen to a playlist?
Read a book.
Which phrase do you identify with more? I am who I am, or I am always evolving?
I'm always evolving.
Hmm. Go on an adventure or stay in and relax?
These are so hard because I like all of them. Okay, but if I had to choose one, stay in and relax.
Yeah, especially because it's about to be cold out, right? Let's be real. um, Rewatch favorites or search for a new show?
Rewatch favorites. I'm
Oh,
sorry,
yeah?
it's so boring. Yes.
No, well, I have to ask then, just super quick. Do you have a favorite that comes to mind?
No, but what I was thinking about is I like classic movies.
Oh, okay.
So I'm a classic movie person, and I've seen most of them, or many of, and my favorite old stars. Um, so yeah, I'm thinking of that.
Yes. Yeah, and when you think of classic movies, like, what era are you thinking of? What decade or
Well, it's
your
the
time?
whole, I am like a film. I feel like one of the lives I didn't take that I could be taking right now is a PhD in film person. So yeah,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, I'm curious about the entire evolution of this cultural product of film. And so I especially watch movies from like the golden age of Hollywood, if you will.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, so it's all those early stars whose names we know and some we don't know as well. But,
Mhm.
Betty Davis and Joan Crawford and Myrna
Mhm.
Loy and Bill Powell. I mean, these people that a lot of people are like, who, what? Robert Montgomery. But also, looking at Oscar Micheaux, the first Black director of
Uh-huh.
silent movies, and, within these gates and Hallelujah, these early Black representations on film, and films made by women producers and directors whose names we don't know enough of, because a lot of the female early creators of Hollywood and of
Mhm.
film were sort of forgotten, or it kind of intentionally buried. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's another place for me to look at these social dynamics of inclusion and exclusion, and to just sort of think about how they are part of those stories that are the subtle inputs to who matters and who doesn't.
Yeah. Wow. So it's not even just a matter of entertainment for you.
No, really?
Like, this is a deep interest.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, we're moving on. All right.
Okay.
So socially, what do you prefer? The more the merrier or more fun with fewer?
More fun with fewer.
Okay, and the last one for this or that, here for humor or please be serious?
Here for humor.
All right, 11.
Right? Because my goodness, life is serious enough. Yeah. I'm actually both. I think that's the thing I've learned, that I have this introvert, extrovert, like I'm right on the line.
Yeah.
I'm a lot of like, this and that is my thing. And so it was hard. Those choices were hard, but I appreciate the questions.
So you just are identifying with the whole structure, all the thises, all the that's, it's all there.
It's all there. Yeah. I'm so serious. Of course you cannot be, you got to be a person who laughs a lot, given how seriously I take everything.
I love that. Yes, very well said. Okay, so the next section is called rapid fire. And so these are just shorter answer questions and just a handful of them. First question is, could you tell me something that you've read lately that you would recommend to others?
Yes. I mean, I'm looking around because I have so many books around me.
Do I see stacks of books next to you?
I have stacks everywhere. Like
right
here, down on the ground. I have this book, Black and Buddhist, right here. I've got like this whole stack of books in front of me. No, I am so this is the secret. Okay, what book would I recommend? I would recommend this book, The Right Use of Power by Cedar Barstow, because I think a big challenge of our time is knowing that we have power, knowing that there are many temptations to abusing it, and dedicating ourselves to using our personal power and interpersonal power and official and unofficial power for good. So this is one of the many books that I have around, but this is another one, Social Dominance, which is about how we misuse power, like, and why and how the temptation to dominate other people, right? Yeah. And again, so yeah, I have a lot of books. One over here is called Black Fatigue, which says it all in the title, how exhausted Black folk are during this time. But yeah, then these are just the stacks over here. Over here, I have a whole nother. Yeah, so this is not supposed to be, No, I have, can I show you? I don't know. Can you?
Yes, see? Please. Yes, let's see the stacks.
Okay, so can you see these stacks?
Oh yeah, you're not kidding. There are many stacks.
Many stacks. My partner is kind of like, this is not supposed to be a library. We're supposed to have a library space downstairs. We have both. And then I have my upstairs. Yeah, so I'm a book person.
Yes, but isn't it a tradition of libraries to have the upstairs be the stacks? Like, that's a thing. Exactly. So really, you're just fully living into that idea.
Fully living into it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I need to have you talk to my partner.
Yeah, you could even say, I'm going up to the stacks now.
I'm going to the second level stack. We have three levels. So I have books on every level, which I think that's
Yeah, always within a reach.
Yes, within reach. When someone asks this really good question, like, what book would you recommend?
I love that. Well, I ask that a little bit selfishly because there's really nothing I like more than a great book recommendation. So I'm for sure adding these to my list. But seriously, for listeners, I mean, we're talking about, this is someone who has a room full of books. So these are the books that she mentioned that she's recommending right now. So they obviously must be fantastic.
Yeah.
If we're talking about within a room full of books. So, or a house full, really.
and yet, really, honestly, I mean, depending on I love books because it's a reminder that, again, we've inherited so much, and all of us, again, not that our resources are equal, because we know that they're not, but the world and the world of information, the wisdom that's been gathered, cultivated, shared is so vast and much more easily available, some at cost, but not all at cost. There's so much more that's freely available today than used to be, that yeah, I could just go on and on about the books I could recommend. There are just so many.
I love that. I'll have to bug you another
Yeah,
time.
exactly.
Okay. Do you have a favorite item right now? Maybe it's a tool or an app, something that you would recommend to a friend or a colleague that has helped with maybe productivity or just something that you enjoy?
That's an interesting question. What am I having fun with? That's like a device,
It
or
could be, yeah, it could be an app, it could be a game, it could be some sort of tool that you use, like in the context of kitchen or getting ready or your meditation practices. I think generally, like at any given point in time, we kind of have something that we're excited about in that moment. Maybe it's even
oh,
as simple as like a new sweater that we get or
oh,
something. But
okay,
is there anything that you have that you felt like, oh man, like this has helped me or I really enjoy this?
yeah. So one thing is these sorts of like coat, dress, jacket things that
Yes. Wait, describe in more detail.
okay. I mean, maybe I can even stand up a bit, and maybe you could see a little bit more of it. I know I'm like totally breaking all the podcast
No,
rules.
this is
It's
fantastic.
like, okay, it's like really long,
Oh, yeah.
and it can be worn as a coat. uh, it could be worn with nothing underneath it, like a dress. I could put a belt around it.
Hmm.
And these are made in different countries, a few different countries in Africa, but Kenya in particular is one. And so I found these, you can buy them here in San Francisco or online now.
Uh-huh.
So I have a number of them, and they're just like my new go-to thing. Every day I feel like an extra boost of power when I'm
Yes.
wearing one of these. They're like my new power jackets.
I love that. And it makes getting ready so much simpler when you have
Exactly.
your own. Yeah. So if someone wanted to find such a thing, what
Yes.
what sort of word might they use? How would they search up an item like this?
Well, this particular one, I will go ahead and promote them. I get no fee, no, you know what I mean? Like, I am not a legit, like, you know what I mean? This is
You're
just,
not influencing.
I'm not in it, not right. No one's paying me for this. But Zuri, shopzuri.com. They're made by a company called Zuri, Zuri.
Okay.
And so shopzuri.com. And they have, if you don't want to invest in a jacket,
Mm,
because they're, like $100 and some dollars, they have these little inexpensive less expensive things, like, I just
cool.
color. You know what I mean? Like, I
Yeah.
just feel, my partner's family is from India, actually. And
Mhm.
many years ago now, 2007 or so, it was one time I went with him to, his sister got married. I went there for
Mhm.
the wedding. And I remember coming back and feeling like, are Americans depressed? Why are we
Yeah.
not having more colors? Where are the colors? So, because we went from Mumbai, Bombay to New York City, and it was color, 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 color everywhere in India. And we
Yeah.
went to New York, and it was everybody's in their black,
Yeah.
they're gray, they're
Yeah.
navy, our taupes, our basics, and
Yeah.
it had a spiritual kind of impact to that, the night and day, color, less color. And I feel that is part of the hidden, subtle, kind of soup that we swim in. The way in which our culture, um, normalizes what it looks like to be a professional. It doesn't,
Oh, yeah.
right? And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I've been on a journey to kind of try and repair. that sense of separation. Really, a lot of my work is about healing separations, and it feels like there's a way that color is meant, out there for the artists. Here I'm a law professor.
Yeah.
And I want to bring in color. I want to bring in creativity wherever I can.
Oh, what a beautiful statement. We love this. Okay, I'm gonna have to look this company up. We'll put it in the show notes too so that people can readily find
Good,
them.
good, good.
Okay, awesome. What is something people would be surprised to learn about you?
Well, some people know this,
Mhm.
so it's not like it's not knowable out there. But I think people are sometimes surprised to know that I trained as an Army officer and
Mhm.
almost went to West Point, meaning I had an appointment from Senator John Warner to appear at West Point as part of the class of 1989. I would have been.
Mhm.
And like the last weekend before I was due to report as a cadet there in the summer of 1985,
Mhm.
um, I had this opportunity to attend this event for like high achieving teens.
Oh, yes, your honor. What was it? Teen of the year or
Yeah,
teenager of the year,
I did exactly. I wrote
right?
it. Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I got that teenager of the year event thing.
Mhm.
So I had gotten that, and then I was swept away and honored
Mhm.
at this event. It was actually my first time in a plane because my family didn't have, we didn't have resources for flying. So I was in that teenager of the year honor was the thing that led to my first flight. And it was summer after graduating high school.
Yeah.
And here I was in what they did at this event. I'm laughing, smiling because I've never talked very much about this. And my partner, when I talk about it, he's like, it just sounds like something that could never have actually happened. But it was something called the Banquet of the Golden Plate. And the idea was I know,
Yeah.
exactly, to bring together like these young, achieving kids
Yeah.
with adults who had achieved a lot in the world, in medicine, in politics, in music. And so I was surrounded by these people. There were the person who created the artificial heart, Dr. Henry Jarvik. Betty Ford was there. There were like, Lionel Richie, like people who had achieved in all these different areas.
Mhm.
And I was at a table there, and these adults were asking us things and trying to advise us. And so it was in a conversation there that they called them luminaries. They actually said, bring the kids and bring the luminaries. So these elders were saying, it sounds like you might not necessarily want to be a career military officer.
Mm.
So, and I had this opportunity to go to the University of Virginia or Georgetown University or West Point, right? So I was
Really great options.
options. And so they were like, you could choose one of those and be okay. But and it was a whole thing because I had a stepfather who really wanted me to go to an academy, and I was going to be disappointing my stepfather. But because I had these good counselors, that last weekend before I was supposed to report, I said no to West Point and yes to UVA and did a different life.
And that is how it goes, right?
Yes.
You could
Yes.
have been in film, you could have been in military.
Exactly. I did do the Army ROTC scholarship though. And so I didn't go and get the academy like career out of the
Yes.
military, but I did do ROTC scholarship. So yeah, that hidden thing is that I am trained as a military officer. But I got my training at University of Virginia as opposed to West Point.
Mhm.
And now I think of myself as kind of one who wants to be in the army of those who love and heal.
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah,
yeah. So I think it's
yeah.
a surprise for people to know I actually also trained in sharpshooting with an M16.
Oh, yeah, that's specific imagery right there. Yeah.
I did that.
Oh my goodness. Well, Rhonda, this has been delightful. I've had such a good time chatting with you.
Me too.
I'm so grateful that you wrote this book and decided to just, share what you've learned through your practice in the classroom and personally with the world, and made that accessible to us. So thank you for writing it. Thank you for being here and talking with me about it.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. I'm so glad you reached out. I really am honored by that. And I see what you're doing, and I'm really, really, it's an inspiration to be in conversation with you. And so keep on doing what you are doing, my dear.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate
Yeah.
that so much.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that's a wrap. You can find a link in the show notes to connect with Rhonda, and you can follow her on Instagram at RVMcgee. That's RVMAGEE. But whatever you do, don't hesitate to pick up her book, The Inner Work of Racial Justice. As we discussed in the episode today, it truly is a complete guide to creating a lifelong practice of understanding and taking action for racial justice. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed your time with us today, please share this episode with a friend. Then subscribe, follow, leave a comment, or a 5-star review. Season 1 of this show will include more chats with top authors, experts, and influential personalities. We will be serving up simplified applied psychology, habit theory, and quality of life tips and tricks that you can put into action right away. Until next week, I'm Kate Hammer, and you know how to live.